Everyone's talking about inflation these days, and it's no mystery why. After decades of steady inflation at around 2% per year, since COVID, prices are now shooting up. In Canada, they're up 6.8% in the last year. In most other countries, even faster. And some prices are far worse. Like groceries, up 10%. Home prices, up 26%. And, of course, gasoline, up 36%. It's a long time since we worried much about inflation, and we've forgotten some important lessons about it. In particular, there's an old stereotype that dominates most thinking. The stereotype goes like this. Businesses face higher costs, usually due to labor, which is the biggest cost item in the whole economy. Business passes on higher costs to consumers, and that causes inflation. This theory is called wage price inflation. It's a simple theory. Wages are the root of the problem, and there's an equally simple solution. Raise interest rates, slow down the economy, including with higher unemployment. That will reduce wage pressures and bring inflation down. But here's the problem. In 2022, that stereotype is totally wrong. And the usual medicine could be worse than the disease. Quite literally, there is zero evidence current inflation is caused by wages. Wages grew just 3.3% in the last year, less than half as fast as prices. That's even slower than wages were growing before the pandemic. Back in 2019, wages were growing 4%, but inflation was only 2%. So wage growth has slowed down even as inflation exploded. How can you blame workers for that? And why should we expect that cutting wages even further will somehow solve the problem? Here's the worst thing. Since wages are growing much slower than prices, workers' purchasing power, the real wage, is shrinking, and fast. Canadian workers on average lost over 3% of their real standard of living in the past year alone. And there's more to come. Yeah, the unemployment rate is relatively low, but there's no evidence that's pushing up labor costs or driving inflation. In short, workers didn't cause this inflation, but now workers will pay again if interest rates are jacked up, causing higher unemployment, maybe even a recession. So, what did cause the current inflation? Clearly, it's a consequence of COVID and how the world economy is reopening since the pandemic. Many supply chains around the world were seriously disrupted, like semiconductors or cars that are in short supply. Energy prices shot up, especially after the invasion of Ukraine. Consumer buying patterns changed. We bought building supplies for home renos instead of restaurant meals and international travel. That lifted some prices. But on top of all that, there's another factor that's usually ignored in polite company. Businesses have jacked up prices far more than required to offset their higher costs. So, profit margins got a lot wider. While workers saw a 3% cut in real wages and are getting a smaller share of the economic pie, after-tax profits climbed to their highest share of GDP ever, over $500 billion annually. Higher profits drive higher prices and shift income from workers to employers. Energy prices are a great example. The gas in these pumps was produced here in Canada. The oil came out of the ground months before Putin invaded Ukraine. The cost of producing it hasn't changed, yet the price is up 36%. That can mean only one thing. Oil company profits have absolutely skyrocketed. They tripled in the last year. And that money came directly from your pocket. Remember, it's not the workers in a store that set the prices for groceries, it's the company. Company decisions directly drive inflation, and company profits, as a result, have never been higher. This isn't the 1970s, and this isn't wage price inflation. It's profit price inflation. It has different causes, and it needs different solutions. Government can address some of the ultimate causes by fixing our energy system, so we aren't tied to oil prices, and fixing our housing market to expand affordable housing. Supply chains will eventually adjust. More investment in technology and infrastructure would help, but that won't happen if interest rates are jacked up. Meanwhile, wages must keep pace with inflation, while the true causes of the problem are addressed. By itself, having wages simply match inflation doesn't cause inflation. Labor makes up under half of total production costs, and productivity is improving. That further reduces unit labor costs. So, workers' incomes can and should be protected, while the true problem is addressed. If necessary, domestic buying power can be cooled off with targeted and fair measures, like higher taxes on the companies that are making out like bandits from the high prices we pay. Due to an old stereotype, workers are being set up as sacrificial lambs to solve a problem they didn't cause. Workers have already suffered a big wage cut. Now they'll suffer even more from a deliberate slowdown or even a recession if this old medicine is applied to a brand new disease. I'm Jim Stanford, and this is Debunkers Academy.